We need to get my computer up. We just need to change computers. Hi everyone. I don't think I've rarely seen so many cameras pointing at me at the same time. I'm really happy to be here. While we get the slides up, I'm Aya. I'm from Airbnb, and maybe I can just start with a short little survey. How many people here have actually heard about Airbnb before coming today? Oh, not everyone. How many of you have used Airbnb? Are anyone host on Airbnb? Maybe we can think about that. So what I want to talk about today is first of all a little bit about Airbnb, our history and our growth, but then I really want to talk about the sharing economy and how that actually is a new movement kind of connecting people all over the world through exchanging, borrowing, bartering, and negotiating about services or products or knowledge, and which is actually happening and growing as a really, really quick speed, both globally and through companies like Airbnb. So this is me, and this is basically Airbnb. So for those of you who used us, you probably find this familiar. This is where I stay tonight. It's a room, and it's with a nice host, Peter. I had Thai food in his apartment last night, and that's what we do. The really short version is what we do is we enable people to share their space, whether that being a room like I stayed in or an apartment. And it's on a nightly basis or a weekly basis. So I can come here and I can spend a night with someone who's local, someone who can tell me a little bit about Stockholm, someone who can give me the tips and tricks, and I can do that in a quite affordable and easy way. Before I book, I can also see about Peter, can see that he responds most messages, that he has some good reviews on his apartment, and I can see a lot of pictures of the room. That's Airbnb. But the thing is, this is quickly growing. I'm actually not the only one. Last night, for example, about 150,000 people are staying on Airbnb in 192 countries all over the world. That means that every single night we're creating 150,000 offline connections. So even though I book online and I do it on my smartphone and I have my app, the connections that are happening in actually real life with 150,000 people doing this and meeting each other. And it's creating these amazing, unique experiences for people who are using it. How we think about it is that Airbnb is really a new way to think about travel. Think about travel as a way to visit a city and being a part of the city and not necessarily just visiting the city. But it's also a way to think about how to use your most valuable asset. Very often our home is what we spend the most money on. It's what we have a lot of pride and a lot of joy with. And yet we still often have extra space. It could be a room, but it could also be when we go on a weekend trip to Berlin. And Airbnb is a way of thinking, hey, if this is empty and someone else is going on a weekend trip to Stockholm at the same time, maybe we could actually do a win-win situation. They could get to see some Scandinavian design and how we live, and I could get to make some money for my trip to Berlin. So that's really Airbnb. I want to tell a little bit about our story because it's actually a quite fun start. We started in 2008, and we started with solving a problem, like many startups do. So the problem was there were two guys just recently graduated and their apartment was very expensive because there was a recent raise in the rent. This is actually the apartment. It's still on Airbnb. And they were with this problem, like how are we going to pay the rent? What are we going to do? And they thought, hey, we have actually space. Look at all this floor. What are we going to do? And at the same time, there was a conference coming to town, a design conference. So all the hotels, every traditional accommodation was sold out. The articles were writing, oh no, where will people stay? What they did was that they built a little website called Air Bed and Breakfast. And they went down to the supermarket and they bought some air beds and they placed them in the apartment and they actually rented them out. And they're like, this is a brilliant idea. They met these people and they thought, oh, maybe people will come, it'll be young people. But it wasn't. It was a businessman, it was a family. It was people coming who were just getting this local experience. And they showed them around San Francisco. They said, oh, this is a great place to go. This is not something we would recommend. And they were like, this is an opportunity to connect with people who are coming to visit our city. And that's what happened since. It then became Airbnb and you don't have to provide breakfast and you can also sleep in a real bed. But what we do is we do apartments, so you can go to an apartment for a night and you can stay all over the world. But you can also do something unique. We have more than 500 castles in more than 40 countries. So if you want to go there and kind of have access to something that you probably, for most people, will not own, you will get to have access to that for a limited amount of time, and you can go and experience that. It could also be a very unique villa, or it could be tree houses. We have a lot of tree houses. It could be boats. So really, it's not so much always about staying. It's also about having that experience with something that is local, something that's unique, and sharing that with whoever you're traveling with, but also with the people living in the city. It's truly global because it's not me standing here managing apartments somewhere. It's private to private. It's peer to peer. So it's me renting out my place while I'm not here, and it's me renting out my extra bedroom if my kids are gone or something like that. And it is happening across the world because what we really see is the network effect. So you go traveling, I go travel here, and I think, oh, this was a good experience. I go back to Copenhagen where I live, and I think I should probably rent out. And then someone comes and visit me, and they visit me from Canada, and they go back to Canada, and they say I should rent out. So you really see that you're creating a global community of people who are sharing their spaces around the world. And basically, what's happening is these unique travel experiences. Back to the 150,000 people every night who are staying. They are, yes, staying in someone else's bed, but they are really creating something that is unique because it's not the same. It's not supposed to be the same. You can probably find anything from a couch to a penthouse to castles. So this is 2008. I just want to give you a quick overview on kind of what happened since we started in 2008. You can see that there was already 2009, like a couple listings around the world, and we just saw that it started to grow. And this was even before we had offices, so this was happening simply based on people meeting each other and talking about this experience that they had. And 2011, and you see now in 2012, and I think when we can make this for 2013, we'll see that it's a lot more. Right now, we have 500,000 places you can rent all over the world, and they're in more than 35,000 cities. One of my dreams is that we have to cover every city. I was in Mongolia this summer, and it was actually really hard to find an Airbnb in Mongolia. So we still have a far way to go, but we are in many places, and we have about 8.5 million guests who have stayed on Airbnb in the lifetime, where more than half of those are actually this year. Just wanted to enter a little bit of Stockholm since we're here. Stockholm has 1,600 listings and a growth of more than 300% last year in visitors. There's also 3 houseboats, which for me is a little strange because there are more than 1,400 houseboats worldwide. So I think Stockholm should probably have a few more. But it's definitely a place where it's very popular. People are going a lot, and I'm sure that those of you who raise your hand as a host would say that you have a lot of guests coming in. So this, I have to put this one on a special mention. We were here in April, and we had an event actually at this cafe, and I met Adam, who built his own raft. So he's a young guy. He built his own raft. It's half an hour outside of Stockholm, and it's on Airbnb, and it has a full camping equipment. So you can even go there, and you can just put up the tent, and you can sail around. And I would ask him, do I need to be able to sail? He's like, no, it always ends up anyway somewhere where you can go to the land. I was like, huh. So he has a couple of reviews. He rents out his house, his little raft, and he built it. Like, it's just too cool. So that was Airbnb. We're really growing, but what I think is interesting about Airbnb is one thing that we are providing these experiences, but also that we're part of a bigger movement. And this movement, it could be called the sharing economy, collaborative consumption. There are many ways of kind of defining what we do, but basically it's sharing stuff, sharing resources, sharing things that we're not using when we have capacity that we're not using. And we see a lot of companies popping up in this space, and I just want to go quickly through like the start of the sharing economy or some of the things that we're seeing that's happening right now. This is a recent article in Time magazine. Says, someday we'll look back on the 20th century and wonder why we own so much stuff. And I think this is very interesting because sometimes when you come up, you're like, oh, this is we're sharing, this is new. No, sharing is not new. Sharing is actually why we originally moved into cities. So if you go way, way back and you think of urbanization, you think of people moving in, when you live in a city, you do that because it's more efficient. You do it because you can share stuff. So when we think about it, we might not think about it daily, but we share things like roads, like electricity, like water, and it's completely natural to us. We live in the city and we of course share these resources because not only is it more efficient for us that we don't all have to build our own roads or have our own bus, it's also more sustainable because we don't keep creating resources when we can actually share them because the degree of utilization on these resources is not very high for the individual. So what we're really doing, what we saw is in the 60s, people started making more money. They started being able to have their own car and their own house and their own stuff and their own lawnmower and all of this. But really, we went away from sharing because sharing was the norm before. And we went away from sharing this stuff because suddenly we could. And I think what we're seeing now is a shift towards going back to that sharing. Not only with the basics like water, but also with our home, with our car. Because we realize that, for example, a car, we use it an average 1 hour a day, and then for the rest of the time it's just standing there. At least in our part of the world, we always leave our house for a certain amount of time. So we go traveling for a lot of weeks a year and we leave that empty. But other things too, like all those things that we don't think about, like our bikes, for example, are very popular. So I think we have to think of it as a way that we're moving toward sharing. I think we're going back to sharing. And I think it's a way of connecting. And I think it's a way of getting closer to the community that we're in, whether that being travelers or being our neighbors. This is just a little picture in terms of sometimes people say, oh, but I don't really know what I should share. I like this picture because it really shows that I don't think there's anyone in here who don't have anything to share. And it's not about going into a circle and going back and saying, now we need to sit here and share everything that we have. It's about saying, I have something and you need something. And sometimes you have something and I need something. And sometimes it's important to have a car. It's really good, but then when you don't use it, maybe someone else can use it. Or as I recently bought, I recently bought a cabin outside the city in Denmark, and I have a little garden, and I was blown away by the amount of stuff you need to have a garden. It is crazy. You need stuff that you need like 1, 2, 3 times a year. And yet I sit there with people around me all over, and they have the same stuff. But we're not sharing it because there is no system to do so. And I'm not that they wouldn't lend it to me, but I don't know that they have this thing that chops holes in the lawn. So this is just a picture of what the sharing economy is. The sharing economy is also knowledge. It's also stuff. It's different kind of things, but for the purpose of today, this is more about stuff. So if I were to describe the sharing economy with a couple words, I would say it's access over ownership. It's not about not having access to the amazing things that we love. It's not about saving. It's about saying the things that I don't need every day, or the things that I have that I don't use every day. If we share this, it is a more efficient way of living, but it's also a more sustainable way, because instead of producing all this stuff, like an average power drill is used somewhere between 10 and 15 minutes in its lifetime. For all the other time it's laying in its really nice box. And it's about thinking the way that we're actually we need it when we need it. We just need the hole. We don't need to have the drill for the rest of the time. And I think it's that kind of mindset that we go in. There are a couple of reasons I think this is happening now. I think that the reason we're happening is because technology is enabling us to create these platforms that can facilitate these transactions. Because what you're seeing is you have all these people that are having these things or needing these things, but if there's no way to connect these people, it's probably not going to happen because it has to be easy to share. And technology can do that with a platform like Airbnb that can suddenly facilitate something. Homestays are not new either. People have stayed in each other's homes before. You just had to know someone who knew someone who knew someone who could connect you with that person who lived in New York. Whereas now, you can go into a platform and you can post your place or your stuff and you can have someone connected. So I think technology and the way that we are with technology now is a huge part of why the sharing economy is growing as fast as it is. Trust. Always something that when you talk about sharing economy, one of the things is that there has to be trust between the people. And that's also a thing where the platforms that are big, like Airbnb, is focusing a lot on how do you create trust. Because I think people have basic trust. They have basic trust in people. But we also provide systems for helping that. Like on Airbnb, you have a profile. You can verify your phone number and you can leave reviews. So if I write to any of you next time I'm going to Stockholm, you can go in and look at my profile and you can see that other people said, oh, she was nice. She came in, she said hi, and it was a good time. And all these systems are creating this trust, which is really a necessary part for the sharing economy to work. And obviously that we have extra stuff, and that for some people the economy is also a really good time to make sure that we share this extra stuff. And we have a lot of stuff. I mean, stuff is really, it's one of the biggest growing, I mean, it's a really, really huge business in the US to have self-storage, for example. So we have this stuff, and then we need to buy a bigger house to fill up all this stuff. We can't really afford the bigger house. We get the bigger house anyway, we get all the stuff, and then eventually we have to put it on self-storage so that we can store all the extra stuff that we have. And I think this is just a really good time for starting to think about how we can use this stuff that we want, so that we can still have all our stuff, but we just maybe think a little bit more about access instead of having it being a point to own the stuff. Oh. Oh, wait a minute. Also, so one of the things that, since this is a newly growing thing, I just wanted to briefly touch upon the fact that it has, of course, impact on the individual. We see this all the time. People are hosting. I mean, we have a host in Copenhagen. She basically rents out for a really cheap price, and we called her once. They were like, oh, you get all these guests. It's very cheap. She said, yeah, that's because what I tell everyone is that you can get it for this price, but you have to spend half an hour with my kids and talk about where you're from. So she basically have all these guests, and she makes a little bit of money, but she also just liked the idea that her kids will grow up and have met people from 100 countries, even though they don't necessarily have to travel to 100 countries. But doing this also has an impact on the community, so the city as a whole. Like I said, it's a more efficient way to share it. And one of the things I wanted to show you is a couple studies that we did around the world. This is for Paris, and what you can see are the blue dots. You can see they are where you have traditional accommodations, so hotels. And the pink ones are where you have Airbnbs. And what you see is that 70% of the Airbnb properties are actually located outside the hotel areas. And why this is interesting is because that means you're distributing the tourism, you're distributing the visitors to a different group of neighborhoods that you would normally not visit or see. And that's because people want that. They want the local authentic experience. What I think is kind of, if you want to take this one step, is let's say tourism. When you think of tourism, often you think of it as a separate industry. It comes into a city and it lays on top of it. So there is the city, and we live here and we use stuff, and then you have the tourism and it goes on top of the city. But doing things like this means that you can actually integrate an industry like tourism, which we have to prepare for because it's one of the quickest growing industries in the world. You can integrate that to the DNA of the city instead of placing it on top. So instead of building separate institutions for tourists, this actually can integrate them. This is not only a stay. You have other companies. You have like Viable, where you can be a local guide. You have places where you can share a meal with locals. Imagine if your whole experience to a city could be integrated in the city that's already there. And I think this is what we can move towards, and what really is an interesting impact of sites like Airbnb, but also sites like car sharing and Viable for trips. This is Amsterdam, one of the markets that we cover, which is the same. 73% of the properties are located outside major hotel areas. Another thing on this is also, that means that where you stay, and we've asked people this is also where they spend their money, which means you also can benefit the local businesses that are in that area. So you would probably go to the local coffee place. You would have your host telling you that this place is the best Italian restaurant. Or I'm a host, so when people come to Copenhagen, they're like, yeah, we should go see the Little Mermaid. And I say, yeah, you can see the Little Mermaid if you want to, but you have to make sure to visit this like amazing gallery that shows like historical pictures of Copenhagen on the way, and it's free. So you also get to distribute these like local treasures that everyone has. You get to take that into the visiting experience of visiting a city. And I think this is not at all the end. Like, accommodation is a part of it. There are so many more things to come in this place. I know you have a great like food sharing startup here in Stockholm, which is basically, do you cook too much food? You could share that food with someone else. So all of this sharing is actually, sometimes you think of it as this is something that's very new, but we are really seeing now that economists and people are starting to think about it. Like The Economist said, it's time to start caring about sharing because it's also going to be a huge business. There's about 100 new startups a year in this thing, probably more that are coming up all over the world. The Economist, Forbes, a lot of people around the world are starting to write about this, like how does it impact, what can we do, what are the benefits? And I think everyone agrees that one of the benefits of sharing is that you really have a more sustainable way of living, but you also can get some really cool experiences with it. You can get access to things like a castle, or like eating with locals, or something like that you really hadn't tried before. I went to San Francisco recently, and I've been to San Francisco quite a lot of times, but I tried Viable, which does local guides, and I went on a boat tour. And it was amazing. There was this like guy who had been doing boat tours for forever, and he only did it with private people. You can get access to something that you could maybe not get access to, and you can do it because of technology, you can do it because of trust, you can do it because we have extra things to share. And I just wanted to highlight here, before I'm out of time, that this is, like I say, it's a huge movement, and I think I will encourage all of you, if you haven't shared anything, you should try it out. You should go to one of these sites, and whatever you feel more fun to do with, you should think about it, or you can try it as a user, because when we go back and we look at our homes, I'm sure that we'll all see that there is something that we would like to have access to, something that we dream about having access to, but also something that we have that's kind of standing around like a car, for example, or like your place when you go on a weekend trip to Berlin. Yeah, so that's all I wanted to say today, but I'm happy to take questions.